Here we go. Thank you, everyone. We are just starting to record our meeting. Thank you for coming today. I'm just going to introduce myself once more. I'm Christy Foster. I'm one of the teachers tonight with you for psychosomatics. And Linda, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure.
The recording.
Yes, thank you. I'm based in Sydney, Australia. I've been teaching psychosomatics since 2012 and welcome everybody here today.
And Sean.
Good morning, or is it afternoon yet? No, yep, still morning. I'm Sean, Melbourne, Australia, and a very dedicated psychosomatic practitioner.
Thank you. So today we are going to begin with the basic structure of psychosomatics. And we wanted to begin too with the first of the year to bring into our minds today intentions for the year. We're going to be kind of going back and forth about noticing ourselves, noticing different patterns, and what are the intentions, and perhaps give a little bit of feedback and homework around that intention for you by the end. So we're going to start, Linda, we can go ahead and start the slide. I'll let you begin there.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe just before we start that, with what Christy has said about the intentions, as we're doing this, I'd like you to think about an intention for yourself of something that you would actually like to feel differently about in the future. So as you look at the end of the year, what you would notice would be different about yourself. So it could be in your emotions, it could be in your mental field, it could be in something more tangible and physical, but something that you would actually like to go at the end of the year, I would like this to be different. And it could be something that you may have struggled with in the past, that you haven't actioned, just to notice. And if you know that intention, just to make a note of it. If you don't know that intention, that's okay. You don't need to write that down.
These are the three basics for psychosomatics. We have focus, balance, and structure. So we're going to talk about each one and explain what it is. And in your notes as we teach, please feel free to write down anything that you feel is anything that you resonate with, or a question about yourself within these three, because it's helpful to be able to interact with yourself as we teach, because this is an experience of you. That is the core of psychosomatics is, how is your system showing up? How are you responding to the outside world? And most importantly, the inside world, what is happening within us? So we'll begin with focus.
And I was just thinking, Christy, we probably have some people here that don't know what psychosomatics actually is. So we probably should take just a minute to describe that. Can I throw that over to you, Sean?
Yeah.
You can. So psychosomatics as a word, I used to have an aversion to it. I thought it was, I just really didn't understand it really. So the word itself breaks down into syllabus, and the psycho or the psyche is the mind and the conception point of who we are. We have the soma, which is the body. So we have the body, mind, and the artic is at the end is actually about inaction. So it's the body-mind communication, the body-mind bond that happens. So psychosomatics is looking at the body, listening to the body, and recognizing how the mind encourages the body.
Oh, Christy, do you want to add to that?
Yes. In my world of bodywork, the psychosomatics is, is literally understanding what's happening in our thinking mind, what's happened, our reaction to different experiences, and that begins to show up in the body, which is the somatic. And those two things together are always dancing back and forth, whether we are aware or not aware. That is the joining of the mind body. And what I do love about psychosomatics is there's an understanding and a map of what that actually means and what each part of our bodies can show us about where we're at and the patterns that we hold.
Love that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll probably add to that with the mind and the body can have two completely different stories. So the importance of reconnecting with the body and not just the intellectual understanding of events that have happened, because it's in the body that they're stored. And that's why the body work is an essential part, but also bringing awareness to what your relationship is like with your body, your feelings. So we are looking at the mental, the emotional, and the physical. And that's why it's called psychosomatics. There are a number of different modalities that tend to concentrate on one, even though that is, slightly changing these days. But the psychosomatics is the mind, the body, and the soul is all one field. You can't consider one without the other.
Wonderful. All
Thanks.
right, Linda. If we go into focus, when we're talking about focus, a couple different things here. We have a mask and an arrow and a woman holding her temples. So this is really about, this one is about the mind. What are we focusing on? And sometimes with the mask, what we're focusing on literally begins to show in our face. For example, the face will begin to hold patterns that show up. So if there's worry or frustrations, you're going to see that show up in the face of like furrowed lines between the eyebrows. You might see it clenching in the mouth, in the face. You might see someone with focus that is outwardly focused, being someone for other people. That would be a mask that, and we all have masks, just we're all human, and it is a matter of understanding what is that for you, and could we possibly be more of who we are in every situation versus having to put on a mask for other people at work, in relationship, and begin to embody who we are more often. And so much of this has to do with what we are focusing on and thinking, because what that phrase, whatsoever man thinketh, so is he, and a woman. I'm just going to add that in because I think it's so important. The ruminating in the mind is going to bring a reality into the body, into the soma.
I call it the monologue, the broadcast. Yes.
So I'll move that to you, Sean, and let you bring a little more into focus.
Yeah, I call it the broadcast. It's kind of like sitting somewhere and hearing an announcement around you. And often the mind believes that it ought to be the director of all things below it. And when we're able to compromise the mind and lead it in different directions and it becomes a partner, then that in itself means that we have camaraderie occurring. Rather than the domination of the broadcast. And it's very fascinating. Sometimes I'll hear my mind think something and it believes it, but it doesn't mean I need to believe it. And I can safely navigate something different rather than be obedient to the broadcast. Yeah, the mental zone is is a very fascinating place. It has a lot of influence, and it also can be a great assistant. Linda, did you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you. So because we're looking at the mental zone, we're actually looking at the forehead region. And by taking a look at and working with clients, we're looking at any kind of disturbance within the clarity of the tissue within the forehead itself. And that really speaks of where is the focus, because of the focus is around worrying about the future, being concerned by how other people will perceive you. It creates that looping that Christy was referring to. And in that looping, you're not actually clear and present for what's happening here and now. And this is a lot with anxiety, worry, depression. It's about not being present. So as we're taking a look at clues that are in the face and the body, we're really starting to be informed as to what a client's mental state is. Obviously, emotional, physical as well is going to come into it. But we really want to know is what is the enjoyment of the mind space for that person? Because with worry, with anxiety, with depression also comes a conversation we don't often have, but it's like, what style of thoughts do you have and how supportive are those thoughts to you? So this all comes under the heading of focus. As we start to tame some of those emotions, understand them differently, it changes our internal relationship to ourselves and the clarity of our focus, the clarity of our mind.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. One thing I wanted to add to that as you were talking, Linda, when you're not aware of what the mind is broadcasting. I like that term, Sean. The body
so
is
annoying.
It's perfect because the body's always responding to whatever is being broadcast
relative to the relationship.
Yeah. And this is where the beauty of psychosomatic is, as you begin to understand. So it could be, we see the face here, and Linda talked about the face and the furrowing here. Sometimes you will also feel it in your belly as a tightening, a knot, when you're thinking about something that you tend to ruminate about, or there's fear around, anxiety around. It's going to show up somewhere in the body, and the soft tissue and our organ system is going to give you messages constantly because they go back and forth. And sometimes, let me say, not always, sometimes people don't feel anything. There's also that response in I don't know, and not being able to tap in. That's also part of this focus. I have a client that I've seen for a long time, and we joke about it because I will ask her, does this hurt? I don't know. I block it out of my mind. I don't have time to think about it. And we laugh because once we start working, she will say, oh yeah, that does hurt. Because she has been able, that's what she's been doing as a coping mechanism to continue to move through, because there is so much on her mind, is what she says. And very powerful what our minds can do in the body to either block out or enhance some of those feelings and create more anxiety and or more depression or disconnect with the body.
We just have a question here from Camilla. If we're looking at the lines and tissue in the forehead to see patterns in mental focus, how would Botox affect this? And how would we see this in a youthful person that doesn't have lines that have set in yet? So the Botox is the freezing of muscles, for those that may not know what that is. And therefore, the freezing of the muscle makes it immobile. And that's on the surface, yet underneath is the behavior can still continue. And when we freeze something, it doesn't necessarily have that agility. So we're starting to do something toward ourselves in order to freeze a part of ourselves. So we need to consider what's behind having that experience. And at the same time, that the youthful part, Camilla, that you're talking about, more often than not, habits are yet to be formed. So when there is minimal lines, and this is also, we're talking about genetics here. We're also talking about epigenetics, which is part of what our environmental learning. So we have these influences, and then with those influences, we also have our personal choice. So we need to notice how we relate to the system of focus, so that mental scope, but we also need to see how that mental scope is impacting me. And that's when we start to get imprints that show up, pathways that we prefer to use rather than the dexterity of all pathways. Linda or Christy?
I think you explained that really, really nicely. Sometimes when I'm doing presentations, one of the things I'll do, and I'll just suggest it to you guys for a second, is to think of when you're angry, how that shows up in your body. And maybe just try it on for a second if you don't mind actually putting on an angry feel. And just notice if when you're angry, you can close your eyes if you want to do this, and really feel into it. Notice what your hands do, what your jaw does. You might notice your butt or your legs are tightening, but just notice how that exists. And then maybe shake that off. And now imagine yourself at a time where you had so much pride or joy or happiness. And I want you to feel it on your face, like smile. Yeah. And I want you to hold that facial expression. And as you hold it, see if you can access anger. And if anyone wants to share what your feedback on that was, feel free to unmute and say your feedback. But most of you will probably have noticed something different in your body. Okay, no sharing. So what most people would notice with that is when you're smiling, you can't easily access anger. And it's the same as the Botox with the numbing that Sean was talking about, the numbing down. So when we lose track of what it is that we're trying to numb, that may not always serve us well. And yet, if you're somebody who clenches your teeth in the nighttime, you might find that if it's creating problems within your experience of your teeth and cracking, that could be something as a short term that could be really good for you. Christy.
Well, I was thinking, Linda, as if you have your notes with you, I would like you to write down what are some of the things that you focus on, that if you're aware of that, just so you can start to follow with us. And that I would also say we could pull in some distractions to keep us from focusing on something that we'd want to create or want to heal. Sometimes, well, often I think distractions are part of running away from feeling and running away from sometimes the looping in the head, because when we bring attention and focus to what might be happening or has happened, that's when emotions begin to move in the body. And I will hear many times, I don't want to feel that. I don't want to focus on that. And the body is waiting for us to pay attention. It's waiting for us to look in and say, okay, well, what am I distracting myself about? perhaps. And can I sit with that or sit with someone in that? Because that's where the awareness and healing begins to happen, is slowing down, paying attention to the clenching, paying attention to the broadcast. And what is your body doing? Sometimes even in the flesh, the body we can have more flesh depending on what we focus on, and less flesh. The emotional issues show up in the tissues. And that's where understanding what your focus is so important, and maybe reframing it from fear or the past to coming into present time. And even like Linda said, I liked your example, Linda, of smiling and slowing down in that, and where am I, versus staying distracted, running from, eating, drinking, sex, smoking. There's so many distractions that we all have as human beings to move us away from focus.
Because the point of neutrality.
It brings neutral. Us back.
Christy, I had to laugh when you were saying that, because I had Sean's voice in my head.
Oh,
and Sean
a broadcast.
Sean would often say, there are no amputations in psychosomatics. There are only integrations. And so often, when we're working with clients and students, what we're noticing is their avoidance of particular emotions and their desire to get rid of the emotion rather than to embrace what that emotion is trying to tell us.
Well, the moment that you embrace it is the moment that it becomes something that serves you. It adds to your resource. It's called power.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
It can be very destructive or it can be very embracing.
And Christy, I loved how you also just sort of asked everyone to notice their triggers. And a really beautiful exercise to do with that is to notice how you feel about changing your behavior around the activation of that trigger. Just to notice if your body's okay with the thought of changing something. If you notice all of a sudden a feeling in the stomach, it could feel like anxiousness. And it's always nice to know that anxiousness and excited has the same feeling. So as we look at the power of words and psychosomatics, changing the awareness of the body and going, I'm excited rather than I'm anxious.
Very helpful, because the body responds to that very quickly. And I think it also empowers us when we use that languaging, Linda, of I'm excited versus anxious.
Yeah.
I loved that when I first heard that, because I thought, oh, I can reframe that. Because I certainly have caught myself feeling anxious when really I was excited. And so when I began to change that pattern in me, I did notice my body settle down, and I didn't go into overwhelm, because that's the pattern of I feel this way, my body would go into overwhelm, and then I'm hijacked by whatever this was telling
the
me.
survival mechanisms that show up.
Yeah. They're very powerful.
So, Christy, are you talking about things like, body language? If you're sitting there with your arms folded and your body's kind of tense versus your arms maybe down at your side or your arms in your lap, or those types of things, is that the body language that you're admitting out to somebody? And when you get anxious, or do you tend to tighten up? Does your body tend to stiffen up a little bit? Or if you're scared, you tend to stiffen up? Or if you're angry, you tend to stiffen up? And when you're more happy and relaxed, your body gives out a more relaxed look or feel?
Yes, JT, well said. So yes, it's both. So we've all seen people and even ourselves when we're anxious or feeling that unsurety sometimes, what I see is the folding of the arms, sometimes the pulling in of the mouth, and even a literal body language of pulling back out of a situation or a conversation. And we're always reading body language. Unconsciously, that is the higher percentage of our communication. And so that's why we're here today too, is, okay, what does it mean when I do this, which we'll go more into, like even distractions. Some distractions can be the phone, it can be the tapping of a toe, it can be a clenching of the feet, clenching of the hands. And if you're not aware of what you're doing in the moment, it's very difficult to come out of that pattern. And when I'm working with people, what the whole idea is to get you to notice what your pattern is when you get anxious and to slow down in the pattern. So say, for example, you clench your toes when you're anxious. And what I have people do is begin to notice through the day, randomly sometimes, if their toes are clenched, and begin to unclench as they take a breath, because what it does is it begins to regulate the nervous system. And so your focus becomes inwardly focused to create some empowerment that you actually do have a choice in the reaction to what's happening. If there's something happening outside, and sometimes anxiety is in our bed at nighttime alone. And it doesn't really matter. What matters is, okay, I'm noticing the reaction and I'm going to shift my focus with my body and my breath very intentionally to come into that place and relax my toes, for example, or unclench my hands. So that's a very good question.
Constriction is just that.
Mm-hmm.
The moment that we feel powerless is the moment that we're constricted. So there's an inversion. It's like a vacuum that happens. And the body responds accordingly. And then when we're able to create a shift through that, an openness through that, then we're able to access greater resource, greater sense of self. That openness also shows up in the body in suppleness, flexibility. The body being calm creates calmness in the emotion, and that in turn also slows down the mental system, that nervous system, space.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people really lose contact with whatever that distraction is within the body language. They lose connection with the original feeling and what it does. So sometimes we need to get them to do the absolute opposite pattern. And I remember one of my students, she said, Linda, I don't care what you say. I fold my arms over my chest because it's comfortable. And I went, yep, okay, I get that. Can you stand for 5 minutes with your arms by your side?
And access comfort.
And as she did that, she got probably about 2 minutes in and she just went, oh, I can't do that. I feel so vulnerable. Mm-hmm. So she didn't have the feeling of vulnerability in her natural stance, which was always holding her arms just below the chest. So in doing the opposite, that's when you start to notice. And that's why, Christy's example of unclenching the toes, to actually notice, what is the feeling of the body when I do something like this? Because that's the sensation that the body's, in some respects, trying to avoid or be protective of. The mind is protective. And I think it's really important to know and to really, I see a lot of clients that feel that their body is against them. They feel the body is under attack. The body never, ever, ever attacks itself. There is a system of prioritization and it's protection. So that's what it's trying to do.
Yes, and it is very smart. Okay. Sean, I'm going to let you start balance.
Oh, be my pleasure. This was a challenging one for me to learn, actually, originally. I didn't even consider it to be something. So when we look at focus, we're obviously looking at the mental scope of who we are, and we're looking at the mental activity of who we are. And that in turn brings us down to balance, yeah? Because there's layers that take place within our form. And we're looking at the mental and now the emotional. Balance is all about emotional balance. We have spectrums in all feelings and all aspects. And we have been granted access to all of them. We can go to one extreme and we can go to another extreme, but balance is the median line between the two. We need to know when that seesaw tips and we're going one way. What are we doing over there? And we need to notice how constructive are we being for ourselves and others over there, and then come back to the medium, come back to the center point. That center point is where health happens. I'm neither in an extreme or I'm neither in a vacuum. I'm indifferent. I'm in between the two. I spent a lot of my life at that extreme point, believing that was powerful. That was an illusion. It was a well-rehearsed power, but it was also a deflective power rather than an embodied power. So I would push power out rather than embodied power, rather than just letting it reside within me. Some things in front of me need just a little bit of that power. Some things in front of me need a little bit more of that power. But that power needs to be with me at any given point in my life. I may not need its full reserve for certain things that I do, but there are other things where I'm going to need to be able to reach in for more of that. Emotional balance creates stability. There have been so many times in my life where I can notice that emotionally there's an overactivation that's happening. And I need to learn how to soothe that. I need to learn how to stabilize that. I need to notice my emotional habits. And being an extrovert, it was always about outside of me. And then I needed to learn, well, what's inside of me? What's passing through me? How do I remain with myself within who I am without impacting the world? Now I can share and offer and exchange anytime I like. But my emotional balance is what creates my internal state of contentment.
What about you, Linda? In balance.
In balance. So I guess if I'm looking at a client and taking a look at how would we recognize balance within the body, definitely the extremes that Sean talked about are very important parts. And we need to take a look at, what builds tissue and what creates the lack of tissue. So when we're looking at the balance of the emotional body, we're looking usually at the flesh, the muscles, the ligaments, and how they've been developed or overdeveloped, or the ones that are underdeveloped, because that really gives us an insight into the masculine and the feminine that exists within each body, and which one is the favored form of expression. By the nature of the words, masculine is associated with positive. It's, you know, it's all about active, left-hand side of the brain. So it's, you know, it's got a lot of movement to it. Whereas the feminine is the emotional side. And, you know, we not only look at the face, we look at the body language, and we've chosen this image on the screen with the armoring, because as the person is armored, it tells us about the story underneath. And if it's really hard armoring, we know that contained within that hard armoring is a really sensitive soul. Once they create a lock-in around their heart, then not only is it hard for people to get into them, but it's also difficult for them to get out. So these are all patterns that we start to notice, not only in the archetypes, but in the emotional balance of how that person experiences that in their world. What about you, Christy?
Thank you, Linda. This is really one of the key areas that I am looking at when I am looking at a body is that what's the symmetry between the right and left side of the body and or the face. And those patterns, the armoring over such a long period of time. That's why it's so important to understand what your balance is, your center point. That pendulum can swing. And with armoring over a long period of time, that's really where we start to see some of the dis-ease in the body, which can be migraines, it can be fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue. The reaction to again and again to a person's experience creates this response in the flesh. So if someone feels like they don't have a choice but to give, if their value is only found in giving or serving, you're going to see someone that has a lot of fatigue in their body. And I would also say different body shapes with someone who overgives and overgives, because the body will always respond to what we're doing and or not doing, which I find fascinating, because it's moving based on what the focus is again. And the armoring, which is a great picture here of a tin man is what I would call that. I know that's a knight. The body literally will become that if it's only doing one thing. And what I find the most is overgiving and overdoing.
Yeah.
Even when, like Sean is an extrovert, I am not an extrovert. I would say I'm more of an introvert. And it's the same though, because it's what's happening in our heads about it. Where's our value found? And if doing and giving is that, which is, I think I see that more often than anything, to ask someone to come into stillness or come into a feeling state, what I will hear is, I don't know what you mean. And what is that? And I don't like to do that, because it literally becomes our armor and our safety zone. And the beautiful part again about psychosomatics is, okay, yes, and would you like a deeper connection with self? Because as we connect back to ourself and notice these, that's when the alchemy, the transmutations happen in our flesh, and it starts to soften. And indirectly, people feel that. People in your life that you care about, first and foremost, are going to feel that softness in you if you tend to have the armoring. And on the opposite spectrum of that, if you are, sometimes you'll have desensitized tissue versus really hard tissue. And as we begin to get a better sense of self, the tissue actually becomes more firm. The spectrum holds both always at the same time. It's a frequency of energy that is here, And we always want to find somewhere in the middle. And as we notice the patterns that we step into, and then we step back out, or we create a little more wiggle room with what we think it needs to look like or sound like. That's where healing really begins to happen in our psyches, let alone our bodies. It's always both at the same time.
Allowing more options. Allowing more options. In amongst some of our conversation there, Camilla also asked, it's a slight backtrack, but we can map it back in. Camilla was asking about patterns that were given to us by society, like girls always crossing their legs or being asked to cross their legs. That's all part of what's called epigenetics, Camilla, and the freedom inside of habits is that we have freedom of choice. So there are certain things that society may do or does or accepts or prefers, and all of those are reflections that enable us to notice who we are and how we need to be. So it's understanding how some of those reside in an unconscious way, how some of those serve us in positive ways, and also noticing your freedom of choice.
You mean we have a choice? Because sometimes that is very true.
Well, I used to be the rebel, so I used to always do the opposite of what society did, but that didn't give me freedom of choice.
Right.
It gave me a reaction, but it didn't give me freedom of choice. Freedom of choice is what serves me in the best way.
Yeah. Anything you want to say about that, Linda?
No, beautifully said. I guess just on that here, just on this current screen, we're going to be sending you these after we finish this session, so you can consider it in more detail. So don't feel you need to write it down. But we'd like you to consider, where your balance is like doing, giving, receiving. And when you don't have balance around that, what message are you sending to your body about you being important? So just something to reflect on that you can reflect on afterwards as well. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Christy?
Yes, this is my nerdy archetype coming through. The question I like to ask myself is, where am I hemorrhaging? Because it will show up in my body, hemorrhaging energetically. So if I'm worrying about something a lot, I'm going to usually feel it in the same space. And to begin to notice that pattern is so essential to your emotional health and your physical health. And just like Sean was saying, right, power is held within us. It's not other people's to hold their power. I mean, they should not be holding your power. And I think a beautiful question to add this that's not on there is, are there any people in your life that you feel like are holding your power? And to begin to excavate that question a little bit, because it's very relative to armoring to protect against, if that's the case. And we're all human. We've all, it's part of our moving through this human experience, is beginning to notice and check and have us be our driver instead of situations and culture. And what is that for you?
Our internal relationships to aspects of ourselves have been nurtured sometimes, but they've been created before our mindscape started activating it further and reactivating it further. So it's noticing the nuances of those responses. Power is a really unique aspect of life, and we all require it. We all deserve it, and we all need to learn how to utilize it. We need to learn how to lovingly exchange that with each other. So power is something that is a self-relating experience.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Linda, is
Linda,
this you then? I
yeah,
started the last one.
Must be me. So with the structure, there is sacred geometry in the structure of the body. The DNA is contained within the bones. And what we're looking at is how well does your body support you with your habitual body language patterns? How aligned are you to your body? And there's something that happens when we want to distract ourselves and when we are too concerned with what the rest of the world is doing. There's a tendency to actually bring your head forward. So your actual attention is around you, outside of you, rather than your body being aligned over you. So it can feel sometimes like no one's actually home on the inside because everything is on the external. And the other thing we take a look at is, of course, starting from the foundation, which is the feet, are your ankles, your knees, your hips in alignment with your shoulders. So we're looking at the alignment not only front on, but also side on. And it gives us an idea of the flow of your energy, the flow of your thoughts. Because if your feet are actually wandering out and you have a V shape like this gentleman does, we know immediately that there's a loss of focus within this body stance. And you'll notice the very, very wide stance that this gentleman is taking. So not only has he got a wide stance, but his knees will be quite locked as well in order to hold this stance. So one of the things we do in psychosomatics, we do the push test. You can actually come along with one finger and press this person in the sternum, and they could fall backwards. So this is the stance of someone who is overcompensating on feeling a lack of confidence. Even though whilst doing this, he may feel confident, it's actually like a lack of confidence. And if this was a long-term stance, it would start to create some really, really concerning agitation of the joints. And other ways that we take a look at this, is like where else do these attitudes get held in the body? So we're looking at, particularly the joint pain and how you allow the emotional flow coming through from the mind. So if the mind's in control, the joints will be locked. And this is Christy and Sean's expertise because they're both amazing bodywork people.
What fascinates me about the body is that when we allow life through, when we let life occur, when we choose to fully experience something for the entirety of the cycle in which it exists, the body restores itself. So the structure is actually the home of the innocence. The innocence resides safely within the structure. And when I say the innocence, I'm referring to the signature that is me. It doesn't live in my head. If it does, it might sometimes have a good time. However, it resides in my body. And when we feel safe in our body, our innocence also feels comfortable, which becomes a representation within the physical form. And in body work, consistently opening bodies into themselves restores that comfort, because it's finally a place where they know they can be, but it's also a place where they want to be. Christy.
Yeah, a place where they want to be. I also think that's part of that pendulum swing, because I don't want to be here, and yet we are here in our bodies. And the beautiful part about understanding our structure, it shows you personally, me, what patterns I've held, usually from childhood, especially as we begin to bring in awareness. So I'm going to talk about the opposite of this stance, which would be someone with their feet really close together and their body smaller, versus I'm out here. There, you also have the opposite, which is the disappearing or wanting to be invisible. And that can happen through someone's life if they're not aware of the why. This is why your body is here, and then how to begin to shift it. Because I think the more that we can understand the why, we're much more open to, okay, how do I do this? And being willing to shift that body posture so you feel like you have more power again. So someone that will want to be invisible and very small, perhaps, the practice for them to even put their feet out 3 inches can be very vulnerable and also empowering at the same time. And that is the beautiful paradox of psychosomatics and beginning to access power, that you're the one turning that knob. And it can be done in a very gentle way. It can sometimes be, like Linda said, it can be vulnerable if they're not showing you a big stance or if they're not becoming invisible. And that's the work really of coming into who am I in alignment versus defense against or hiding from. Who am I? And when I first work with people, I show them what the pattern is and a piece of homework of what it could be, and to begin to practice that and tell the body, this is my new normal. Because the body is going to respond again to what we focus on. Coming back to the first slide, it will respond to you and begin to feel more comfortable in this new stance, because that's the work of coming into safety within our own structure, that when we're in alignment, that's where we are coming from, is received better as well by other people. We're not restrained and contained and closed off. We're actually open, in alignment, being present. Even with Linda saying, if the head is forward and the body is forward, we're coming out of ourselves. And so this structure is coming into alignment. And in psychosomatics, the simplicity of having your feet straight, and to notice today, some of you have heard this before, some of you haven't. Are your feet straight and about 2 fist widths apart? How are you landing on the planet every morning? And to begin to balance that out so you become more conscious in your own structure and how it's showing up.
There are many times in our lives where growth is important, and growth is about accessing a greater point of view, a healthier emotional spectrum, and a more stable body. So it's looking at how do we need to be in order to evolve? Who do I need to be in order to evolve? How can I assist all aspects of myself to continually grow? And often there's fragments or aspects that require just a little bit more consideration in order to exist in a more healthier way for us.
Anything else you want to say on that, Linda?
No, other than I guess if you saw the last screen that was up, we're just suggesting that you get somebody to take a photo of you when you're not looking. So just sort of say, hey, in the next half hour, I just want you to take some photos of me and to notice your foot point, to notice how your body is, so that you've got like an external reference to go, when I'm not really concentrating, what's my natural body stance? And to give it some insight back to, what we've been sharing today. And obviously we've gone into the 3 keys of psychosomatic therapy. It is the underpinning information that all psychosomatic therapists learn. It's really important to really, tune into your own body and feel this, how it exists for you, because it's one of the ways that people can start to make incredible changes. And I think that's been covered nicely today.
Mm.
And we are going to be sending you a PDF with all of those questions so that you can maybe reflect on them later. Just wondering if anyone has any questions from what we've covered so far today.
No.
Everyone's evolved.
In this moment, yes.
I love it.
Okay. So we will be doing different themes on the different conversations. So we invite you to share with us either afterwards, later, some of the things that you might like some assistance with that you think would be beneficial for you, so we can consider what you're asking for in our upcoming topics. And before I stop the recording, Christy, is there anything you would like to say?
Yes, I love this work so much. It is something that I eat, sleep, and breathe. You can ask JT, you could ask my husband that. He would say, Christy, do you have to notice everything? It's so beautiful to begin to be aware of you and to step into more alignment and more wholeness as you notice the patterns that block or have blocked you in the past. Because sometimes it can be really confusing to get out of that loop that we create as human beings. And psychosomatics is an answer to what the loop can be, and pointing yourself in a different direction that makes it a little easier to understand and move towards. And I want to thank everyone for being here with us today and participating in our community of psychosomatics. I appreciate you all giving us your time tonight and this morning, Australia people. Thank you.
On that note of community, you can also find there is a psychosomatics page, a public page put together by INTAPT. INTAPT is the association, the leading association for psychosomatic therapy. And so if you look up INTAPT, and I'll put it in the chat now, INTAPT public page, you can join that page and receive all sorts of fascinating info, but also be up to date with where things are happening for psychosomatics and all the other options to hear from many, not just us.
And if you would like to take your training a little bit further than actually to join a training, we'll be sending you some links in the PDF, but we do actually have, all three of us are doing a combined online 66 hours of training. So that's going to be over 2 days per month, a Saturday, Sunday weekend, once a month for 5 months. So that's up and coming, and we'll send you information if you're interested. We're happy for you just to be on these calls and just to show up. It's our gift, and that's a pleasure. But for those that do want to explore further, there are a number of different courses, both as introductions plus as the more extensive training.
And we have one more question about, might you consider making a WhatsApp or Signal group for ongoing conversations and questions?
Oh, very good. I've not heard of Signal. I'll have to look that one up.
It's exactly like WhatsApp, a little more secure
Right.
than WhatsApp, but
Got
it's
it.
the same.
All right.
So yes, we will talk about that because we don't have anything yet, but that's definitely a possibility. And every month there too, you're welcome to email us the questions, because we do have, we meet regularly, and we would love to have you email us the questions or pictures, and then we'll address it in the next call.